In this video, we're going to talk about the 1997 film, Tomorrow Never Dies. So Pierce Brosnan blasted onto the big screen in GoldenEye, winning the entire world over. And while he may not have been the most accurate to the Ian Fleming novels, he won over the worldwide audience and created a new type of Bond, the blockbuster Bond for a new generation. And Pierce Brosnan, who was incredible as a suave but deadly 007 in his James Bond debut, continues to be suave and deadly in this film. And Michelle Yeoh is incredible as Bond's opposite number in the Chinese Secret Service. I have to admit, when this movie came out in 1997, I saw it on opening weekend and I had a great time, but I remember being a little disappointed at that time. Well, now it is almost 30 years later and we've had 7 more James Bond films, a whole era of the Daniel Craig Bond films, and we're at the dawn of the Amazon Bond movies. And I think I'm at a very different place now in relation to the Bond movies as I was in 1997, which is, almost 30 years ago? Well, I just saw this movie again recently for the first time in over 12 years, and I have to admit, I really enjoyed myself this time. It's a great action-packed movie with spectacular stunts, amazing fight sequences, Pierce Brosnan at his finest, and Michelle Yeoh showing us and the world why she would one day become Queen of the Universe. I had a much better time watching this movie than I thought I would. Now, after the success of GoldenEye, Eon fast-tracked the next 007 movie, which would officially be the 18th Bond film. In fact, the 18th Bond movie was greenlit 6 months before the release of GoldenEye, simply based on the positive reaction to the GoldenEye trailer. Eon received strong pressure from MGM to start making the 18th Bond movie, and one of the reasons was that MGM had just been taken over by billionaire Kurt Kerkorian, and he wanted to release Bond 18 to coincide with their public stock offering. Therefore, the pre-production of this movie was really rushed, hence leading to a lot of the chaos that is associated with the production of this film. They asked director Martin Campbell, who had directed the last film, to return as director, but Martin Campbell refused, saying that he didn't want to do the same project back to back. Martin Campbell would return to direct my favorite Bond film, Daniel Craig's Casino Royale, and he would also direct The Mark of Zorro and the future flop Green Lantern. So for director, they hired Roger Spottiswoode, which was really a weird choice if you think about it, because prior to this movie, the 2 biggest movies he had made was Turner and Hooch and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. The first draft of the script was written in 1995, and the story involved the return of Hong Kong to China, which was set to occur on July 1997. However, there were several reasons that they decided not to go in this direction. First, they didn't think they could finish the movie by July and felt that they needed the extra 5 months to finish the film. Second, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who was acting as a consultant on this film, recommended against it. He stated that if something actually did happen during the handover, the movie could look ridiculous. And thirdly, if you base a movie on a real historic moment, it would immediately date the film, and you want your Bond movie to be relatively timeless. They rehired Bruce Feirstein, who wrote GoldenEye, to return and write the screenplay. And incidentally, GoldenEye was his first produced motion picture screenplay, Tomorrow Never Dies was the second, and The World Is Not Enough would be the third and last screenplay he'd ever write. And how he was able to get the job to write the screenplay for Tomorrow Never Dies was that he pitched it as words are the new weapon, satellites the new artillery. And they loved it and hired him.
Words are the new weapons, satellites the new artillery.
They accepted the screenplay, and then Roger Spottiswoode hired other writers to clean up his script. And one of the writers they hired was Nicholas Meyer. That's right, Nicholas Meyer, who wrote and directed Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, who wrote the screenplay for Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, the one with the whales, and who wrote and directed Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, actually worked on a version of the screenplay. In fact, a whole panel of screenwriters came by and wrote different versions of the script. And apparently there was a lot of conflict on set, with producers not being happy with the script and actors not being happy with the way their characters were written. Pierce Brosnan had gone in interviews to say that the script that were handed on the first day of shooting wasn't very good. So the writers had to continue to write and rewrite the script while filming had already started. There was apparently so much tension on the set that crew members were threatening to quit during production, and about halfway through production, director Roger Spottiswoode and some of the writers just stopped talking to each other. Now, Roger Spottiswoode has later said in interviews that a lot of the reported chaos on set was exaggerated, and that in reality, the morale on the set was not half as bad as what was reported. Apparently, the original title of the script was Tomorrow Never Lies, and apparently it was based on the Beatles song Tomorrow Never Knows. However, there was an error when they were sending this to MGM, and the MGM executives accidentally misread it as Tomorrow Never Dies, and they liked the title so much that they insisted that it be changed. And Tomorrow Never Dies, this is the first title not to have any relation with Ian Fleming. GoldenEye was the first movie not to be based on any of Ian Fleming's books, but it was still named after Ian Fleming's Jamaican beach house. However, sadly, this will be the first film not to involve Albert Cubby Broccoli, who passed away just before this film. And this film would be made entirely by his daughter Barbara Broccoli and his stepson Michael G. Wilson.
And this movie is dedicated in his memory.
And of course, Broccoli and Wilson wanted Pierce Brosnan to return for the movie because he did have a 4-year contract, and the last one did phenomenally well. And for the Bond girl, director Roger Spottiswoode wanted to have a very strong woman in the Bond girl role, possibly the strongest Bond girl ever. And so he cast Michelle Yeoh to be the main Bond girl in this movie. And I think he succeeded because Wai Lin is arguably the toughest, the most badass Bond girl in the history of the franchise, before and after this movie. When Michelle Yeoh was chosen to be the Bond girl, Pierce Brosnan was very impressed with her, especially by the fact that she did her own stunts, and he was also impressed by her serious work ethic and talent as an actress. And he has been an outspoken fan of hers then and now, and to this day, they're still friends. And I was very excited for this movie because of Michelle Yeoh, because in 1996, 1 year before this movie, a movie called Super Cop starring Jackie Chan and Michelle Yeoh was released in the US. And apparently in Hong Kong, Super Cop was Police Story 3 Super Cop, originally released in Hong Kong in 1992. But I remember my friend Roy and I went to see it on opening weekend, and we were already Jackie Chan fans at the time, but neither of us had heard of Michelle Yeoh, because this was 3 years before Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and it was the 1-2 punch of Tomorrow Never Dies and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon that would turn Michelle Yeoh into an international superstar. But back in 1996, with Super Cop, we were absolutely blown away by Michelle Yeoh, and we absolutely fell in love with her, and I became obsessed with her and started to find out all the other movies she had been in. And when I found out that she would be the next Bond girl, I was thrilled, and I couldn't wait for this movie, so I had very high expectations for this film. Now, Michelle Yeoh, birth name Yeoh Chu Kang, she was already a superstar in Hong Kong, known for doing her own stunts. And in 1985, at the age of 22, she starred in her first kung fu film called Yes, Madam, for which she was nominated for Best New Performer at the Hong Kong Film Awards. And in 1992, at the age of 29, she starred in Super Cop, aka Police Story 3 Super Cop, with Jackie Chan, which made her a Hong Kong superstar. In 1994, she starred in the kung fu classic Wing Chun, which solidified her fame in Hong Kong, making her the top superstar in Hong Kong. Interestingly, she had no martial arts training. She's a ballet dancer by trade, but remember, Jackie Chan was also a dancer, and in Hong Kong opera, the dancing is very acrobatic and rigorous. The year this movie came out in 1997, Michelle Yeoh was listed as People Magazine's 50 Most Beautiful People in the World, and she's going to have an amazing career after this movie. In 2000, she'll star in The Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which will make her not only an international superstar, but a superstar in the US. And she's going to star in hundreds of very successful films, and in 2008, Rotten Tomatoes ranked her as #1 greatest action heroine of all time. And in 2009, she was listed as People Magazine's 35 all-time screen beauties. She's won numerous awards and recognitions, and in 2002, the International Junior Chamber honored her as Outstanding Person of the World for her cultural achievement, and she's been awarded the French Legion of Honor twice by 2 different French presidents. In her home country of Malaysia in the year 2013, she was awarded the most esteemed Order of the Loyalty to the Crown of Malaysia, which carries the title of Commander or Tan Sri in Malaysian. So basically, if you Wikipedia or Google her name at the time, she will pop up as Commander Michelle Yeoh. And only 250 people in the entire country of Malaysia can hold that title at any one time. In 2016, she starred as Captain Philippa Georgiou in Star Trek Discovery, and in 2019, she starred in Crazy Rich Asians. And soon she began to conquer Hollywood. And in 2022, she starred in Everything Everywhere All at Once, which won Best Picture and also won her an Academy Award for Best Actress at the 2023 Academy Awards. And today, she's arguably the biggest female superstar in Hollywood right now. and not bad considering that this movie was her big Hollywood premiere. And Michelle Yeoh really loved making this movie and had nothing but high praise for Pierce Brosnan, whom she described as a perfect gentleman. And while much of the cast and crew struggled with the chaotic nature of the production of the movie, it really didn't bother Michelle Yeoh at all. And this is because Michelle Yeoh was used to chaotic productions because that's how most Hong Kong action movies are made. She was used to it. Now for the role of the main Bond villain of the entire movie, Elliot Carver, they originally cast Anthony Hopkins. Now remember, they wanted Hopkins to be the mentor of Bond as 006 in GoldenEye, however that never materialized. But at this time, he accepted the role of Elliot Carver and he even appeared on set. However, when they started production, Hopkins was apparently so disgusted with the chaos on set and the fact that they didn't have a completed working script and that every morning he was being handed a new, different script. So he walked off the set after only 3 days of filming. And by April 1997, when filming began, they had no completed script and no actor to play the main villain. And the role of Paris Carver still had not been cast. Eventually, they settled on Jonathan Pryce. However, can you imagine had they got Anthony Hopkins to play this role? I think that would have been amazing. But I do like Jonathan Pryce as an actor, even though at the time I wasn't sure if he was right for this role, because Jonathan Pryce is a prolific actor. Now he's probably best known for his role as Sam Lowry in Brazil, as well as his role here. But he's also been the customer who sold real estate by Al Pacino in Glengarry Glen Ross. He was in Pirates of the Caribbean. He's also the president that gets kidnapped in G.I. Joe Retaliation. He's been in a lot of supporting roles, and he's always very good in those roles. And in 2008, Jonathan Pryce would also go on to play Ian Fleming in the biography movie. And in 2019, he was nominated for an Academy Award for his portrayal of Pope Francis in The Two Popes. Coincidentally enough, playing against Anthony Hopkins. So it all connects. He's a fantastic actor, and he's kind of funny looking, but there's this sort of pitiful and fragile, sympathetic human quality about him that really works in those roles. However, I don't know if he evokes power, and I certainly don't think he evokes evil. He's more sort of goofy and grandfatherly, and that's why I wasn't sure if he worked as a megalomaniac, the big bad who's trying to take over the world. But I have to admit, he's really going for it here, hamming it up and chewing the scenery. Regardless, the director Roger Spottiswoode really wanted Jonathan Pryce for the role, and I think I know why. Now, it seems obvious that the role of Elliot Carver was based on media tycoon Rupert Murdoch, who owns The Sun, The Times, The Daily Telegraph, The Herald Sun, and The Australian, and in the United States owns The Wall Street Journal and The New York Post. He also owns the book publisher HarperCollins and the television broadcasting channels Sky News Australia and Fox News. And as powerful as he was back in 1997, he's even more powerful today, making this movie seem almost prophetic. He pretty much controls the news that we consume today. The producers of this movie adamantly denied that Elliot Carver was based on Rupert Murdoch, but of course they had to say that. You can't openly admit that the villain of your movie was based on a real person. However, the producers of the movie claimed that Elliot Carver was based on another media mogul named Robert Maxwell. And you know this man, or at least you know his daughter, but we'll get to that in a second. Robert Maxwell was a very wealthy, litigious businessman who owned the British Printing Corporation, the Mirror Group newspapers, and Macmillan Publishers, and among other publishing companies. And he died in 1991 at the age of 68. And after his death, it was discovered that Robert Maxwell had embezzled hundreds of millions of pounds from his own company's pension funds. And the Maxwell companies had to file for bankruptcy. And people began to discover just how corrupt he had been. So was Elliot Carver based on Robert Maxwell? Well, all you have to do is read the biographies of Robert Maxwell and Rupert Murdoch on the internet, like on Wikipedia, and you can clearly see that Robert Maxwell's life was nothing like Elliot Carver. But Rupert Murdoch? You can see some similarities, but I'll leave that to your own opinion. And the reason why I bring this up is because Roger Spottiswoode really wanted Jonathan Pryce to play Elliot Carver. And I always wondered why. Well, go to Google and search an image of Rupert Murdoch in the 1990s, and you'll realize how much he resembles Jonathan Pryce. And then you have to go to YouTube and find an interview with Rupert Murdoch, and you realize that Jonathan Pryce is doing a perfect copy of Rupert Murdoch's voice. I mean, that's exactly how he talks.
When we bought it, they just started the Saturday edition, and everyone was very divided on whether this...
So Elliot Carver is not based on Rupert Murdoch? My foot. Incidentally, in a 2005 interview with Kevin Collette, director Roger Spottiswoode admitted that Elliot Carver really was based on Rupert Murdoch. Now, I said that you already know Robert Maxwell's daughter. Well, his daughter is Ghislaine Maxwell, who has been in the news for her association with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, for the role of Paris Carver, originally they considered Celia Ward. You'll recognize Celia Ward when you see her. She's had small supporting roles in a lot of famous movies, but she's probably best known for her film role as Harrison Ford's wife that gets murdered in The Fugitive. She played Jake Gyllenhaal's mother in The Day After Tomorrow, and she also plays Jo Danville in CSI New York. And I like her. I think she would have been great. She's beautiful, she's tough, and she gives off an academic intelligence that I think would have worked for this role. And I believe this is the kind of woman that James Bond would have fallen for. However, the producers at the time thought she was too old, even though she was 41 years old at the time, and Pierce Brosnan was 43 years old during filming, even though he would be 44 when the movie would come out. And I thought that was just ridiculous. And one of the other actresses considered was Monica Bellucci, who screen tested for the role, but the producers just didn't like her and they didn't hire her. Monica Bellucci is best known in the US for her portrayal as Persephone in The Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions, and in 2015, she'll get to play Bond's love interest in Spectre. And in 2024, she'll play Beetlejuice's cursed wife in Beetlejuice. She has this smoky intensity and charisma, and when they didn't hire her, Pierce Brosnan just thought the producers were fools for not hiring her. They decided to go with Terry Hatcher, who at that time was best known for her role as Lois Lane in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, as well as the girl with perfect breasts in Seinfeld.
And by the way, they're real and they're spectacular.
And then she would go on after this movie to play Susan Delfino in the brilliant run on Desperate Housewives. And she'd be nominated for an Emmy and win a Golden Globe for that role. So she is a great actress, and I like her overall, but I'm just not sure if she's right for this role. And apparently Terry Hatcher auditioned for the role because she said that her husband, actor John Tenney, who I always think of as playing Johnny Behan in Tombstone, encouraged her to audition, saying that he'd always wanted to be married to a Bond girl. And later she said that she regretted playing the role because she eventually thought the character was so bland and unsatisfying, and she was 3 months pregnant at the time, so she really couldn't do any of the love scenes. And sadly enough, 6 years later, she and John Tenney divorced anyway. Now, there were some tensions between Pierce Brosnan and Terry Hatcher, and it really got bad when Terry Hatcher was late to the set. And he was angry at first, but then he found out that she was pregnant, and he really felt bad, and later regretted being so cold to her on the set. For much of the special effects, like previous Bond movies, they used a lot of miniatures. After all, there were a lot of shots of British Navy ships, and the British Navy did allow the crew to board their ships and film the interiors. But of course the Navy couldn't allow the crew to fire torpedoes, and certainly wouldn't let the crew sink one of their ships. So they decided to do it with miniatures. Now unfortunately, Derek Meddings, who had starred with the Bond franchise with Live and Let Die, and made a record number of miniatures with GoldenEye, passed away after completing GoldenEye. So for this movie, they hired John Richardson to succeed Derek Meddings in making the miniatures. So Carver's stealth ship was a miniature. The British ships, the HMS Devonshire, which was destroyed by the stealth ship and sunk, was a miniature. And the HMS Bedford, which destroys the stealth ship, was also a miniature. The drill torpedo was a miniature. The sunken HMS Devonshire underneath the water was a miniature. And in the scene where Bond remote controls his BMW, some of the complicated action stunts were done with the BMW actually being a miniature. The ocean battles were filmed at a huge water tank in Baja Film Studios in the town of Rosarito, 10 miles south of the US-Mexican border, which in 1997, James Cameron had built a huge water tank for Titanic at a cost of $20 million, and it holds 17 million gallons of water. So soon afterwards, Tomorrow Never Dies will use it, and it'll be the go-to place for Hollywood to rent and film when they need a huge amount of water. It is regarded as the biggest and best water tank in the world. And in 1999, they'll film Deep Blue Sea. In 2000, they'll film Pearl Harbor. And in 2003, they'll film Master and Commander, as well as many other movies. Ironically enough, it was owned by Rupert Murdoch before he sold it to Baja Acquisitions in 2007. Now, one of the casts that kind of got screwed over is Ricky Jay. And unfortunately, a lot of his scenes ended up on the cutting room floor, so he just comes across like a very unmemorable henchman who just happens to hack computers. However, in reality, he was supposed to be more of a supervillain. Ricky Jay, or Richard J. Potash, is an American magician, and he is one of the most famous and respected sleight of hand artists in the magic world. And his hallmark trick is that he can throw cards and make them stick to walls like throwing knives. And it's for real. There's no special effects in this. He can really make throwing cards stick to walls, and you really sense that these simple throwing cards could be deadly weapons in his hands. And that's why he was hired. And in a deleted scene, he would use throwing cards and throw them as deadly weapons at Bond. However, for some reason, they decided not to use that footage, and so Ricky Jay and his character, Henry Gupta, pretty much does nothing other than just kind of stand around and be a very standard henchman. And it's a shame. Now, incidentally, Ricky Jay is so good at magic and sleight of hand that he was actually hired by the CIA, the real CIA, to teach their agents how to pick pockets and to pass items between agents without detection. And did you ever wonder about the name, Henry Gupta? Well, in the original script, Henry Gupta was described as a young man from India. In some alternate reality, there's probably another better version of this movie where Anthony Hopkins is Elliot Carver, Celia Ward or Monica Bellucci is Paris Carver, where Pierce Brosnan has amazing chemistry with Michelle Yeoh, and where Ricky Jay attacks Bond with throwing cards like he's a supervillain in a Marvel movie. For the musical score, they wanted to rehire John Barry, who had not scored a James Bond movie since The Living Daylights. However, they could not agree to John Barry's salary demands, and ultimately, John Barry declined, but recommended his friend David Arnold. And sure enough, David Arnold was hired to do the score. Now, the movie starts out with a terrorist bazaar on the border of Russia, and Bond is infiltrating the arms market and first knocks out a man who is smoking and then says,
Filthy habit.
And this is a hallmark of the new age of Pierce Brosnan Bond, in that Bond does not smoke. We spot one of Elliot Carver's men. This is Ricky Jay, who really got robbed of a more prominent role, but he's here. But like the rest of the movie, he really doesn't do anything but stand around. Meanwhile, in England, the high brass at MI6, including M and Admiral Roebuck, are watching the scene through Bond's camera. Incidentally, Michael Kitchen, who played Chief of Staff Bill Tanner in GoldenEye, was not available for this movie, so they created Deputy Chief of Staff Charles Robinson, played by Colin Salmon. And I love how despite M and Bond having some tension in the last movie, already she has complete respect for him now and has complete faith in him. And when Admiral Roebuck angrily asks,
What the hell is he doing?
She answers,
His job.
And it's an amazing M moment. And Admiral Roebuck gets impatient with Bond and orders a missile to destroy the arms bazaar. And the British ship launches a missile on the Admiral's command, and it does say that it'll arrive at its target in 3 minutes. And this gives us a ticking time clock of 3 minutes for Bond to save the day, because Bond notices that one of the Russian L-39 jets actually has a nuclear bomb. That means that if the missile destroys the area, it could trigger a nuclear explosion, hence triggering a major international incident that the British will be responsible for, not to mention the death and destruction the nuclear bomb might cause. Admiral Roebuck orders the destruction of the missile to abort the bombing, but it's too late. The missile's already out of range and is headed toward its target. And now it's up to Bond to get that nuclear missile out of the target area. He knocks out the pilot and gets in the seat, but another L-39 also launches in pursuit. And the missiles arrive at the target, and we think Bond may have been blown up, but Bond's jet flies out of the explosion. And as they're about to have an aerial dogfight, the pilot in Bond's plane wakes up and starts to choke Bond from the back. And this is such a great action scene. Bond is fighting another jet while being choked to death from behind and steering his jet with his knees. And Bond flies a jet underneath the enemy jet and ejects a pilot who blows into the enemy jet, destroying it. And he says,
Backseat driver.
And Bond asks the Admiral where he'd like his bombs to be delivered. And in my opinion, it is one of the best pre-credit action sequences in the entire franchise so far. And then we get the musical montage, which is an incredible visual feast. But first, we have to talk about Sheryl Crow's song. Now, I have to say, I am a huge Sheryl Crow fan. She was one of my favorite pop stars in the early 90s, and I love My Favorite Mistake and All I Want to Do and Soak Up the Sun. But one of my favorite songs of all time is If It Makes You Happy. And back in 1996, this is one of the songs that I'll play over and over again, and I just love it. And I want to say how much of a Sheryl Crow fan I am so that you can appreciate how much it hurts for me to say that I'm kind of lukewarm on the song. I mean, I can appreciate it as a Sheryl Crow song, and I do love hearing her voice. She's just got a great voice. But something about the song just doesn't say to me James Bond. And I'm not alone, because apparently this is one of the lower tier James Bond songs, with many fans preferring Katie Lang's Surrender, which appears at the end of the movie. And I have to admit, that song does feel a little more James Bond than this Crow's version of the song. Now the visual montage is incredible, evoking computer circuits as beautiful artwork, and I absolutely love it. Now the movie proper starts with the British ship, the HMS Devonshire, which accidentally sails off course and ends up in Chinese waters, where 3 Chinese jets make their appearance. The Chinese want to know what the British are doing inside Chinese territorial waters, while the British insist that they're in international waters. And we get a quick blink and you'll miss it early roll by Gerard Butler. Well, it turns out that someone is using a decoder to mess with the British navigational system, and it's our computer hacker, Ricky J, or Henry Gupta, who has hacked into the Devonshire and has given them incorrect coordinates. And there's a quick blink and you miss it moment where Henry Gupta puts down a pack of cards on his desk, one of the remnants of his deadly card skills that was deleted out of the movie. And while the HMS Devonshire think they're in international waters, they really have gone into Chinese territory. And suddenly, a mysterious ship appears, evoking the supertanker in The Spy Who Loved Me, and this will turn out to be Carver's stealth ship, which is invisible to radar. And they launch a robotic drill torpedo that can burrow holes in ships and destroy a ship from the inside. And if you think this stealth ship is pure science fiction, it is not. This ship is actually based on a real stealth ship called the Sea Shadow that Lockheed actually built for the US Navy, and the real ship resembles the shape of Carver's stealth ship used here. Now, a few of the sailors of the Devonshire survived the sinking of their ship, but Carver's other main henchman, Stamper, kills the crew of the HMS Devonshire with Chinese machine guns. And then they blow up one of the Chinese jets and make it look like the British did it. And as for Stamper, well, this is a rule in the James Bond movies. When you have a tall, muscular European man with bleach blonde hair, he is almost always the bad guy. And in an earlier version of the script, Stamper was to have a brain injury where he would misinterpret pain as pleasure and misinterpret pleasure as pain. Now that trait was eventually dropped, but they would use this idea of the villain who can't experience pain in the character of Renard in the next movie, The World Is Not Enough. Turns out that a mysterious third party, which we'll find out is Elliot Carver, is trying to provoke a fight between the British and the Chinese, possibly trying to trigger World War III. And this evokes You Only Live Twice, where Spectre was trying to provoke a war between the Americans and the Russians, and then again, where Stromberg was trying to provoke a war between the Americans and the Russians in The Spy Who Loved Me. And since the GPS encoder gave the British the wrong coordinates, they'll continue to have the wrong coordinates in locating the sunken wreckage of the HMS Devonshire. And it turns out that Elliot Carver and his news conglomerate, the Carver Media Group, is doing this whole thing just for news ratings. And we get Jonathan Pryce playing Elliot Carver, or should I say, Rupert Murdoch. And we get Elliot Carver's Blofeld moment where he has teleconferences with his various high-level minions across the world. And here we get a really cool cameo. That's Eon's producer, Michael G. Wilson, Cubby Broccoli's stepson. And I have to admit, once you realize that Jonathan Pryce is doing a spot-on impersonation of Rupert Murdoch, I'm starting to appreciate him more in this movie. Now, back when this movie came out in 1997, with the deregulation of news in the 1980s, and then eventual penetration of the 24-hour cable news into every minute of our lives, it was terrifying how much a handful of media corporations were able to shape the way we thought and felt about the world events. And it may have possibly seemed far-fetched that a media mogul would cause World War III for ratings, but now we know this movie was quite prescient. Because now in 2025, with the growth of the internet and how powerful the media has become, completely shaping our thoughts and how we perceive our reality, pitting one group of people against another at the whim of the media elites, this movie seems to have been an oracle that perfectly predicted the future 30 years ago. And today, I think most of us would completely be surprised if a handful of media moguls aren't completely shaping and manipulating the wars and geopolitics of our times. We then go to James Bond, who is making love to some random woman, apparently his French instructor, at the university, but Moneypenny calls him for a mission. Back at MI6, the British military is convinced that the Chinese want a war, but M isn't quite sure about the Chinese. And the Admiral quips to M,
"With all due respect, M, Sometimes I don't think you have the balls for this job.
And M retorts right back,
Perhaps. The advantage is I don't have to think with them all the time.
It's an awesome comeback, and M just keeps on winning. And some felt that the dynamic between M and Admiral Roebuck almost felt like an old married couple. Well, Dame Judi Dench, who played M, and Jeffrey Palmer, who played the Admiral, actually played a married couple in the long-running 1992 TV series As Time Goes By. And we get a nice scene where Bond is being briefed by M and Deputy Chief of Staff while driving around town in a car. And M thinks it's fishy that Carver got out the news of the Chinese attack so quickly, even before MI6 received their intelligence briefing. And M sends Bond to Carver's headquarters in Hamburg to investigate. And she knows that Bond used to have a relationship with Carver's wife, and she suggests that he go,
Then pump her for information.
So what a difference 2 years makes. In GoldenEye, she was blasting Bond for being a sexist, misogynistic dinosaur, and now she's ordering him to use a sex appeal to seduce Carver's wife and use her for information. Bond goes to Hamburg and he meets up with Q, who presents him with his loaded BMW. And there was an interesting deleted scene where Q has a Jaguar, not the Jaguar car, but a real live feral Jaguar, and then he says,
Wrong assignment.
And now I want to see that assignment. Well, this BMW was another product placement. This is the BMW 750iL E38, and it's one of the 2 BMW product placements in this movie. The other is the BMW motorcycle that Bond and Wai Lin drive through the streets of Vietnam. Other product placement deals include Heineken beer, Ericsson cell phones, Omega watches, Avis rental car, as well as the Electronic Arts video game Tomorrow Never Dies. And I love this BMW because not only does it have tons of gadgets, but it's remote controlled by using a cell phone, which is also a taser. Bond heads to the party held by Elliot Carver at the Carver Media Group headquarters, and here we meet our main Bond girl, Wai Lin, played by the incomparable Michelle Yeoh. And of course she'll be Bond's opposite number in the Chinese Secret Service, evoking The Spy Who Loved Me, where Bond's British top spy teams up with Anya Amasova, the Soviets' top spy. And then we meet Paris Carver, played by Terry Hatcher. And it's crazy to think that we could have had Monica Bellucci in this role. And Pierce Brosnan really wanted Monica Bellucci. And I think Celia Ward would have also been just as good. Now, Terry Hatcher does an adequate job, but due to her young age, it's hard to believe that they were old sweethearts. Remember, Pierce Brosnan was 43 years old during filming, and Terry Hatcher was only 32 years old. And that's a great age difference. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the idea that maybe they knew each other a long time ago, but it would have really been cool to think that they knew each other like in college or something. But being 11 years age difference really takes that idea away. And another problem is that Terry Hatcher is just so American. She's very spunky and energetic, and that's what made her so perfect for the role of Lois Lane or Susan Meyer. But I don't think she has that sophisticated European aristocracy that they're trying to imply with this role. I think both Monica Bellucci and even American Celia Ward could have pulled that off much better. Well, enough hating, let's talk about some good things about Terry Hatcher's performance. First, she does add a little more star power to the role, much more than Bellucci or Ward would have provided. In the 90s, there was a time when Eon was marketing Bond to a younger generation, and Terry Hatcher was hot at the time. Second, she is drop-dead gorgeous here in this role, and you absolutely buy that she'd be the perfect trophy wife for some media billionaire. And third, she does have excellent chemistry with Pierce Brosnan. The second you see both of them on screen, you really feel that they're going to hook up eventually, and it is magnetic. So when Paris introduces Bond to her husband, Elliot Carver, Bond begins to poke the bear by asking intrusive questions.
Tell me, Elliot, I was just wondering about your satellites, the way you've positioned yourself globally. Say if you wanted to manipulate the course of governments, or even a ship. No, I'd be lost at sea, adrift.
And Carver gets upset and has his goons take Bond to the back and beat him up, but Bond is able to defeat the men, and then he gets to give Carver a little FU by shutting off the power during his big presentation. And it's classic Bond, the kind of FU that Sean Connery or Roger Moore would do to the villain all the time. Bond goes back to his room and waits for the goons, and he assumes that Carver will send one of them. And I love this. Pierce Brosnan is just so Bond. And good luck to any poor assassin that dares try to go after 007. But to his surprise, Carver has sent his wife Paris to get information on him. The two make love, and Paris decides to betray her husband in order to help Bond, and she gives him information about Carver's newspaper facility and printing press, and that the GPS encoder that allowed Carver's henchman Henry Gupta to hack into the Devonshire's navigational system and send the British ship off course is hidden there. So Bond successfully sneaks into the facility and finds the decoder. And Bond runs into Wai Lin, who is also there looking for the GPS encoder. She trips the alarm, which activates the guards to shoot at Bond. Bond is able to escape, but sees Wai Lin escaping in the coolest way, and I really love this scene. She's walking down suspended on wires. And it paints Wai Lin as another master spy who's as good at her job as Bond is. And it makes you feel like Wai Lin is also having her own Chinese Secret Service adventure, and this is just a brief moment where their separate missions happen to intersect. And I love it. Bond makes it back to the hotel in time to hear a news report that Elliot Carver's wife, Paris Carver, has died. And once more, it is Elliot Carver reporting on news as it happens because he really murdered her. And when Bond sees Paris dead, he is really devastated. But then he hears on the news that James Bond's body was also found next to her. And when he turns around, he sees Carver's hitman, Dr. Kaufman, played by Vincent Schiavelli, a forensic medicine doctor who is also a professional assassin on the side. And he is an expert at human torture and is Stamper's mentor when it comes to torture. And let's face it, this scene here is the best scene in the movie, and arguably one of the coolest scenes in the entire franchise. And Vincent Schiavelli is one of those actors that just pops up everywhere, especially when you need some funny-looking guy, but he's always so memorable whenever he appears on screen. Now, he's probably best known as the ghost that mentors Patrick Swayze on the subway in Ghost, but he's been in so many things. He's the creepy teacher in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He was the alien in Buckaroo Banzai. He was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I can't list everything he's been in because he's been in so much, but he's been in hundreds of movies and TV roles. So Bond is at the mercy of Dr. Kaufman, while we see Carver's goons try to break into his super BMW to get the GPS encoder. And I love that the car is impervious to sledgehammers and gunshots, and even electrocutes anyone trying to get in. And Kaufman asks Bond to open the car door under threat of torture, but Bond tricks him into taking the cell phone and tasering himself. And Bond is able to get the upper hand and points Kaufman's own gun at his head, and Kaufman begs,
I'm just a professional doing a job.
And Bond says,
Me too.
and kills him in cold blood. And it's an awesome moment, one of the best in the Bond franchise. And then we get the central action piece of the movie, the car chase. And it's a very worthy sequence. Bond jumps back into the back seat of his BMW and remote controls the car, and what sells the scene is that Bond is sitting back in the back seat and he looks like he's really enjoying himself as if he were really playing some fun video game. And this scene took 10 days to film, and they used 17 BMWs. They ended up destroying 15 BMWs to shoot the entire sequence, while 2 survived. Now apparently the windshield has taken enough hits that it finally breaks, but that's when the bad guys shoot a missile that goes through the car. Now when the bad guys throw a bunch of caltrop spikes on the ground, which bursts the tires of the BMW, Bond just reinflates the tires. And it is so awesome. Now Bond takes the GPS encoder and jumps out of the car, which the goons follow the BMW to the roof, where he sends the car flying across the sky, landing in the Avis rental shop. And thus ends an incredible action sequence worthy of some of the best car chases in the Bond franchise. Although a small part of me is worried that someone could have gotten hurt when the BMW flew through the air and plowed into the Avis storefront. After all, it was a pretty crowded street, and any time innocent bystanders are harmed in a movie car chase, it really does bother me for some reason. While Bond has succeeded in his mission, he's gotten information about Carver, and he's obtained the GPS encoder. He then heads to a U.S. Air Force base in Okinawa, which I must assume is probably Kadena Air Base, but this scene was actually filmed in RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, England. And here he meets up with Jack Wade, played again by Jodan Baker. And here Bond is once again wearing his Navy uniform, and Pierce Brosnan looks great in his Navy service dress. And this is likely a callback to both You Only Live Twice and The Spy Who Loved Me, the only 2 other times James Bond wore his Navy uniform. Now, using the GPS encoder, they're able to discover the real location where the HMS Devonshire was sunk. However, the wreckage is in Chinese territory, and if Bond wants to investigate the wreckage, he has to secretly infiltrate into Chinese waters. And therefore, he does a halo jump. This is a high-altitude, low-opening jump that significantly decreases the chances of being detected by enemy radar. In other words, this will allow Bond to go into Chinese territorial waters without the Chinese government detecting them. A halo jump is where a parachutist free falls from a height of anywhere from 15,000 feet to 35,000 feet high, where they plummet to the ground for 7 miles, which is about 2 minutes in the air, reaching a terminal velocity of 126 miles per hour. And at an altitude of 35,000 feet, it is usually negative 45 degrees, and the jumper can experience frostbite. Therefore, the jumper has to wear a polypropylene knit with a windproof shell which keeps them warm during the jump. And this halo jump was really done practically for this movie, and it was performed by James Bond regular stuntman B.J. Worth, one of the big MVPs of the James Bond franchise. And you know him as a stuntman who did the free fall jump in Moonraker. He did the aerial jump off the airplane in Octopussy, and he did the Eiffel Tower jump in A View to a Kill, as well as the fight scene on the back of the airplane in The Living Daylights, as well as many, many more. And for Tomorrow Never Dies, he performed 80 halo jumps for the movie. Now Bond finds the wreckage of the HMS Devonshire, and as he investigates, he runs into Wai Lin. Like, what? How did Wai Lin find the wreckage? And at exactly the same time as Bond? Now, I don't really know what's going on. How did she find it? Like, if you know and can help me understand, please comment below. Well, the two discover that Carver has taken one of the missiles off the ship, and they almost die on the ship, but they barely escape. But when they make it to the surface, they're captured by Stamper and his men. And Bond and Wai Lin are handcuffed to each other and taken to Carver's Media Group headquarters in Saigon. Now, originally, Eon had planned to film the sequence in Saigon. However, the Vietnamese Ministry of Culture and Information made too many demands and they could not reach an agreement. And therefore, Bangkok, Thailand had to substitute for Saigon, Vietnam. Elliot Carver orders Stamper to torture them, and Stamper is more than happy to hurt the man who killed his mentor. And in the background we see Henrik Gupta, who is relegated to the role of fat computer hacker rather than the original supervillain who kills people with throwing cards. But just before being tortured, Bond and Wai Lin attack the guards and escape by jumping out of the building and hanging on a huge tower banner of Elliot Carver's face. And once again, this stunt was done practically. Stunt performers Mark Southworth and Wendy Leach actually jumped out of a skyscraper, specifically the Sin Sathorn Tower in Thailand. And they make it to the streets of Saigon and they steal a motorcycle, and it's a BMW motorcycle, the second product placement deal between Eon and BMW. And here we're going to get the second action sequence. And the idea for this sequence came by when they knew they had to match the sequence of Bond driving through the streets of St. Petersburg in a tank. So how do you beat a tank through a major city? Well, Roger Spottiswoode knew that he couldn't top a tank, so he went with the opposite. And what is the opposite of a huge tank where you're completely covered and protected in armor? Well, how about a small motorcycle where you have no covering and no protection and you're completely vulnerable? So Bond and Wai Lin are still handcuffed to each other, so they try to shift around a moving motorcycle to try to get comfortable and find an optimal way to ride the bike. And you feel that they're competing with each other as to who gets to drive the motorcycle. But being handcuffed to each other, they really can't get a correct position. And it's a nice gimmick. Now, director Roger Spottiswoode took Pierce Brosnan and Michelle Yeoh aside separately and without each other's knowledge told each of them not to let the other get in the motorcycle seat. And this added to the genuine feel that the two were competing to drive the bike. Carver's men chase them in a helicopter, and we get an exciting chase through the streets and alleys of Saigon. And in one scene, they jump over the helicopter. And once again, this stunt was really done practically. Stunt performer Jean-Pierre Gois rode the BMW R1200C Cruiser and jumped over a helicopter. Now, there were no wires, there were no cables. He really jumped over the helicopter from one building and landed on the other. However, there were no blades on the helicopter. The blades were added later digitally after the jump. Now, Bond and Wai Lin ride their motorcycle on the balconies of the alley and collapses the balcony as they ride on it. And then they land in a marketplace. And the helicopter uses its blades to try to kill Bond and Wai Lin, and this is an idea that Roger Spottiswoode had. Now, this scene would have been way too dangerous to film, And how they accomplished it was they had a helicopter body on a hydraulic lift without any blades, and the helicopter body was moved around and the blades were added later using CGI. And as the helicopter is about to shred Bond and Wai Lin, they grab a clothesline and they charge the helicopter like David attacking Goliath. And the two slide underneath the helicopter and throw the clothesline at the blades, causing the helicopter to crash, killing Carver's goons. And Wai Lin then uses her earrings to pick the lock of her handcuff and leaves Bond by himself. However, Wai Lin is attacked by more goons, this time Chinese goons, and she has to fight them off by herself. And you know the scene had to be coming, because when you have Hong Kong's top female kung fu action star in your movie, there's no way you're not going to have a kung fu fight scene. And sure enough, this movie suddenly turns into a Hong Kong kung fu movie, and Michelle Yeoh is fantastic and really kicks butt. And there's a reason why this movie looks like a Hong Kong action movie. The goons in this movie are from Jackie Chan's stunt team, who was hired for the sequence. And I like the juxtaposition of the two fighting styles. Wai Lin is an expert martial artist, but she's smaller and has to use multiple kicks and punches to stop a goon. On the other hand, Bond is much larger and stronger, and he can knock out bad guys with one punch. And then one of the goons almost gets a drop on Wai Lin, but Bond has found them in time and knocks him out. And Bond notices that the goons are carrying standard Chinese-issue handguns, which means that the Chinese military, via General Chang, is trying to stop Wai Lin. And we'll learn later that General Chang and Elliot Carver are actually working together. Now, it turns out that this shack is actually a Chinese Secret Service safe house, and here we're going to get a moment that drives die-hard Bond fans crazy. Because Bond looks at the red keyboard and sees that it has Chinese characters, and he can't read it. So he has Wai Lin use the keyboard. But die-hard Bond fans will point to a moment in You Only Live Twice where Bond tells Moneypenny that he majored in East Asian languages.
Instant Japanese. You may need it.
You forget I took a first in Oriental languages at Cambridge.
Therefore, he should have more than easily read the standard Chinese keyboard. Wai Lin reveals a safe house arsenal, and Bond and Wai Lin stock up on some gadgets. Bond grabs a watch, and then he grabs a new gun, and this is a Walther P99. And this was product placement that Eon had with the Carl Walther Arms Company. And so for the next few movies, Bond no longer carries his signature gun, the Walther PPK. Bond has carried the Walther PPK since Dr. No, but here Bond carries the Walther P99, although he actually gets it from the Chinese. But Bond will carry the Walther P99 here and in the next two films, The World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day. And incidentally, Daniel Craig's Bond will go back to the Walther PPK in Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. And once again, this was a very successful product placement deal. For the Walther Company, sales of the Walther P99 went through the roof after this movie. Bond and Wai Lin locate Carver's stealth ship and they plant mines all over the ship. However, Carver spots Wai Lin on a security camera and sends Stamper, who captures Wai Lin. But Bond is able to trick Stamper by faking his death, and Stamper reports to Carver that Bond is dead. Carver reveals his plan to Wai Lin that he's working with Chinese General Chang, and he'll fire a British missile at Beijing, killing all the top Chinese leaders except Chang, who will conveniently miss the meeting. The missile will trigger a war between the British and the Chinese, but then Chang will come in and broker a peace, making him the most powerful man in China. He will then give Carver exclusive rights to broadcast in China for the next 100 years, making the Carver Media Group the most powerful media conglomerate in the world. And Carver has successfully placed the British and the Chinese on the verge of war, and the Chinese fleet and the British fleet race toward each other. However, MI6, as well as the Chinese equivalent, have received Bond and Wai Lin's message that Elliot Carver is provoking both sides and that neither really want to fight each other. They also inform the British and the Chinese that Carver's stealth ship is lurking about in the area. The British are ordered not to attack the Chinese, but to rather look on the radar for the stealth ship. Bond captures Henry Gupta and takes him hostage in order to trade him for Wai Lin, but Carver just kills Gupta. But Bond has a backup plan. He's placed a grenade that is activated from his Omega watch that he's placed on top of gas canisters. And the grenade creates a huge explosion which allows Wai Lin to escape and also creates enough heat for the radar to detect the stealth ship. And the British fire upon the stealth ship while Bond and Wai Lin fight off Carver's men. Now unfortunately, while filming the scene, Pierce Brosnan actually got hurt in real life, because one of the actors accidentally hit Pierce in the face with his helmet and gashed his upper lip, and he had to be rushed to the hospital where he had 8 stitches. Well, Bond and Wai Lin split up, where Wai Lin goes to stop the stealth ship's engines and Bond goes to stop the missile headed for Beijing. Carver deduces this and sends Stamper to the engine room while he gets a drop on Bond. However, Bond activates a drill torpedo and shreds Elliot Carver with it. Stamper captures Wai Lin again, and she's weighted down with chains and thrown into the water. And Bond has his final fight with Stamper on the missile, and Bond traps Stamper, who is burned by the exhaust of the missile. He then destroys the missile, which destroys the stealth ship, thus preventing World War III. And Bond dives into the water and rescues Wai Lin from drowning, and meanwhile at MI6, M makes up a news story that Elliot Carver has drowned after falling off his yacht, and suicide is suspected. And this is actually an Easter egg, because remember, Elliot Carver was supposedly based on Robert Waxwell, not Rupert Murdoch, wink wink. Well, this is exactly how Robert Maxwell is to have died. He is supposed to have fallen off his yacht, and either suicide or foul play was suspected. The movie ends with the British looking for Bond and Wai Lin, who decide to stay undercover just a little while longer while they share a passionate kiss. Now, this movie was made on an inflated budget of $110 million, and this was a huge budget for a Bond film. GoldenEye, which was the record for the highest budget up to that time, was made for half that at $58 million. That said, with a budget of $110 million, Tomorrow Never Dies is getting close to the budget of a typical Hollywood blockbuster. After all, Jurassic Park: The Lost World had a budget of $75 million, The Fifth Element had a budget of $90 million, and Batman and Robin had a budget of around $150 million. So now the James Bond movies are no longer low-budgeted discount films, but major Hollywood blockbusters. That said, this movie did have a huge amount of product placement, which helped offset the cost. How much product placement did it have? Well, you'll be shocked. Because remember, this movie was made on a budget of $110 million. Well, Tomorrow Never Dies made a groundbreaking $100 million through product placement, essentially covering its entire budget. Therefore, everything this movie made was all profit. In fact, it's still one of the few Hollywood blockbusters to be able to cover its entire production budget simply through product placement. The movie would gross $125 million in the US, which is all profit after sharing the cost with the movie theaters, and eventually go on to gross $339 million worldwide. Again, that's all profit after sharing with the movie theaters. So this was a huge financial success for Eon Films. Now, critically, reception was mixed. Critics generally liked Pierce Brosnan and Michelle Yeoh, and they thought it was a very thrilling movie, albeit a typical paint-by-numbers thriller. But the critics who didn't like it thought it was a fairly generic action film. And while the critics may have thought it was a mediocre film, the audience generally loved it. And CinemaScore audience poll gave it a score of an A-. Roger Ebert loved the film and gave it a thumbs up, calling it exciting with a great villain, and complimented it for having a subtler than usual satire. Gene Siskel also loved the film and also gave it a thumbs up, saying it was the first James Bond movie he had liked in a while. And he praised the villain, Elliot Carver. Both fans and critics universally praised Pierce Brosnan's performance as James Bond, as well as Michelle Yeoh's performance as Wai Lin. And the movie received 4 Saturn Award nominations, and Pierce Brosnan won for Best Actor. And the Sheryl Crow song was nominated for a Grammy Award. And looking back on this film, many praise the film for its prescience in predicting the power of the corporate media. And this film, like GoldenEye, also had a very successful video game tie-in. The game was developed by Black Ops and published by Electronic Arts and released on the PlayStation. And unlike GoldenEye, it was released around the same time as the movie, and to the generation who grew up in the 1990s, this marks a seminal video game of their lives. So tell me, what did you think of Tomorrow Never Dies, and where does this rank in your list of favorite James Bond movies? If you enjoyed this video on Tomorrow Never Dies, please check out my other videos on the James Bond franchise. We have Sean Connery films, Roger Moore movies, Timothy Dalton films, and we have Star Trek, Star Wars, comedies like Popeye and Airplane, and I release new videos every week. Well, that ends this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.